హరివిల్లు పాడ్కాస్ట్ శ్రోతలకి ప్రేక్షకులకి పునఃస్వాగతం. ఈ కొత్త ఎపిసోడ్లో నా విశిష్ట అతిథి యూనిస్ లసానియా. తన పరిచయం తర్వాత చేసుకుందాం, కానీ ముందు ఇప్పుడు మేము మాట్లాడుకోబోయే టాపిక్ గురించి, ఈ టాపిక్ యాక్చువల్గా నేను ఎందుకు ఎంచుకున్నా దాని గురించి క్లుప్తంగా చెబుతాను. ఫ్రమ్ నౌ ఆన్ this episode will be conducted in English. So rulers, most of the rulers, and especially the governments since independence in India were accused of, whitewashing the facts, or not telling the facts, or hiding the facts, etc. So that is something that let's say BJP has been doing for a long time against about Congress governments. And now, of course, the tables have turned, and in the recent revision of NCERT syllabus and all that, we can see that the same thing that now BJP is accused of. And I personally believe that, yes, it is important to actually talk about facts and let people take their own, make their own interpretation and take their own lessons individually and also as a society. I feel that there's no benefit served by actually hiding things. Germans didn't do it after World War II. Okay, there is no reason why successive governments after independence in India have. There is no reason why they should have done it, but they have done it. I am not aware of their motives, and I'm not sure whether their intentions were actually served by the outcomes of what they did. But one of those things about one of the chapters in modern India's history that I feel is not much talked about is Operation Polo, which is a police action, which itself is a euphemism for the military action against the state of Hyderabad by the government of India to annex the state. When we say state, we are talking about nation state. Hyderabad state was annexed into India by the government of India through Operation Polo. So what preceded Operation Polo and what happened for almost 2-3 years following Operation Polo is not recorded much. It's there in, I think, there is a commission that went into those, investigated those things and submitted their report.
Sundarlal Commission.
Exactly.
Sundarlal Committee.
But the contents are not easily available in the public domain, even more than 70 years after its findings. So that is why I'm fortunate to find Yunus on internet. He's a journalist. He will talk about himself. He's a journalist who worked in English media and also now Siyasat he's working in, which I believe is published in Urdu media, Urdu. And he also has covered the history of Hyderabad beyond Operation Polo and beyond Charminar. His podcast itself is called Beyond Charminar. So, as I said, I'm fortunate to find him online, and he actually has done a lot of research, conduct a lot of interviews about that chapter in the history of Hyderabad in India. So I'll have some questions for him, but before that, Yunus, welcome to Harivillu podcast, and can you say a few things about your own life?
Hi. So like you said, I'm a journalist by profession. I worked at the New Indian Express, then I worked at the Hindu, then I worked with Mint for 3 years, and then after that I joined Siyasat. So I work for Siyasat.com, not for the Urdu paper. We run the English website separately from the paper. So we have different team. Apart from that, I have been working on this Operation Polo, just like how you said, that people should know about it. That's what even I thought. I think 2017, I first met somebody called Mr. Burgula Narsingh Rao. He is the nephew of Hyderabad State's first Chief Minister, Burugula Ramakrishna Rao. Mr. Burugula Narsingh Rao was in the CPI, his uncle was in the Congress. So it is very funny. He unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. I think he was nearly 90 years old when he passed away. I think 2021 January, yes. I knew him very well. So that's how it started. But basically, it's something that even I think most people, even in Hyderabad, don't know about because, like you said, I think the Congress government for the longest time thought it will be best to just keep it aside and not talk about it. Not sure why. Maybe they felt, I think most likely probably because it is a little bit of embarrassment for them that they had to do this, especially probably after Kashmir. I don't think the thing is, as far as Hyderabad is concerned, it is a little bit more complicated because of it's not just socio-political situation, because also of the geopolitical situation. Like, okay, I'll anyway give you a basic. For people who are listening anyway, I'll give like a basic background anyway.
Yeah. So I will.
So-
I'll come to that question. So I mean, I want to
Sure,
basically
yeah.
unravel it, the story.
Yeah, sure, please go
Bit by
ahead.
bit. But I agree with your point that in fact this is more complicated than the Kashmir issue because in case of Kashmir, how how it became part of India, and of course the communal angle there. Those are the two elements which are also present in case of Hyderabad. What is extra here is that this Hyderabad, at least a portion of Hyderabad state could have been a communist state at the time.
Actually, yeah, that's true, right? So I think even in Kashmir also, they had a very similar revolt against the landowners by the peasants there also. They also had, so see, Kashmir was a Muslim majority state with a Hindu ruler. Hyderabad was a Hindu majority state with a Muslim ruler. Very similar situation, but exact opposite social political aspects. I think, in my honest opinion, the last Nizam probably thought that he was one of the world's richest men. If you were at that point of time the world's richest man, you would have thought you can achieve anything in this world. And I don't think I think he was also misguided by a lot of people around him who basically told him that we can stay independent, you can still be this, that. Because if you look at the entire city's history, I don't think that the last Nizam was an evil human being. He made mistakes. He was a fairly complicated human being. Probably entirely possible that given his he had his physical demeanor, a very small man. Maybe he was a little insecure also, for all you know, as a human being. Because he was a man after all. It's not like he was a god, but people treated him like a god. So I think if you talk to old people even today from Hyderabad, they will not call the Nizam Nizam. They'll say Allah Hazrat. They will be like, "Arey, don't how dare you call him by his name," and things like that. Of course, I think you and I are not people who will follow that in any case. But I think if you see the entire history, there is actually nothing, no interview. There's nothing that we know what the last Nizam was even thinking. You have only second accounts written about him, people who spoke to him, people who spoke with him during certain situations, like the last Prime Minister of Hyderabad, Laik Ali, he wrote a book. The Agent General to India, K.M. Munshi, he wrote a book. The last commander of the Hyderabad State Army, Syed Ahmad Eledrus, he wrote a book. The last Usmanabad District Collector, what's his name? Muhammad Haider, he wrote a book. Sundaraya wrote a book. So everybody wrote a book, whoever was important at that point of time. I think Developalli, what's his name? Developalli something Rao. I can't remember the book. The very fat book on the armed struggle in Telugu, also written by somebody in Telugu. One CPI person only. Can't remember the name right now. But basically, my point is that you have different versions of different sides of the whole thing. And in that, I think, I think one of the biggest things that about Operation Polo is, which is a very important point, is that Nothing happened to Usman Ali Khan, the last Nizam. He after that he got his property. He lived happily ever after. He lived his life. His entire family got money. They were getting money after that also. It's not like anything directly affected him. He was a king, continued to remain a king, died a king at the end of the day. It is, I think, from my understanding, it is the armed struggle and the communists in Telangana that were a much bigger threat to the government of India, because probably had the Indian army not come, the communists would have taken over the entire state. They would have, because the Hyderabad state army was very useless. And even in the book, Hyderabad of the Seven Loaves, the last commander, Syed Ahmad Ali Idrus, actually accepts that the CPI had a better intelligence network in the districts than even the state police. So, which most likely probably would have resulted in the CPI taking over everything. So I have interviewed people from the CPI who were alive at that point of time. Even they said most we would have done, like, the only reason they were stopped was because the army came after 1948. And I think there was also it was very more complicated, right? So CPI was actually very happy with the way the armed struggle went, but there was a split between the leadership, the people who thought that they should continue the armed struggle after 1948, and the people who thought we should stop and now join the Indian Union. And I think that also caused some problems, because by 1951, when the CPI called off the armed struggle, I think roughly around 4,000 CPI cadres was arrested and jailed. Many of them were killed. So by the time the first election also came, the CPI did not actually have enough people to win contest election. And that is why, in spite of that big handicap, they were able to win 42 out of 77 seats in Telangana. Maybe if they had more people, they would have won more seats. But then, even though they did not win enough seats, the fact of the matter is that in Telangana, in the first Lok Sabha election, CPI won, I think, 9 out of 11 seats, which shows the larger support that they have. And Ravi Narayan Reddy from Nalgonda won the largest ever victory in Indian history till date. He won a bigger margin than even Jawaharlal Nehru. And I think that, not I think, the India's first Lok Sabha parliament was actually inaugurated by Ravi Narayan Reddy, because he got the highest majority.
Okay.
So yeah.
So let's do a deep dive and in a chronological order. So can you quickly tell us the timelines of the key events preceding and after Operation Polo?
The timeline is actually it's like this. You have to go back a few hundred years. Hyderabad, the Golconda, the kingdom of Golconda, which historically in the 1600s included Telangana, Andhra, Rayalaseema, all three of it, and some parts of North Tamil Nadu also, including Chennai towards the end. Nice. 1687 is when Golconda is taken over by the Mughals, right? 1724 is when the Mughals appoint the first Nizam as governor of South India. So that is when the first Nizam comes, and he doesn't come to Hyderabad, he comes to Aurangabad. So it is the second Nizam in 1765 or around that time when he decides to shift the capital from Aurangabad to Hyderabad. A lot of reasons, including Marathas, who are very powerful, they were not able to fight them. So 1765 onwards, Hyderabad once again becomes the capital. And the second Nizam, so the Nizams were basically not actually kings ever. That was the whole point. Nobody realizes that Nizams were actually only governors. They were answerable to the Mughal. Like they kept it that way because they didn't want to complicate their relationship. So they were the overlords of everybody in South India, except that they were only answerable to the Mughal. They were basically paying annual tax to the Mughal till the very end. So the Nizams were not actually ever kings. So the second Nizam ke baad kya hota? If you look at the territory of the Nizams, the first Nizam's territory, I think, had parts starting from lower Madhya Pradesh to Maharashtra, down to Telangana, Andhra, Rayalaseema, most of Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, except the west coast. It was a very, very big area. I think roughly about 20 to 25% of the entire country. So second Nizam ke time pe kya hota? This fellow, now in the I think post 1760s, you start seeing the British East India Company and the French trying to come and gain some kind of territory. They're fighting between themselves to kind of get the Nizams come in the good books of the Nizam. And the second Nizam, in 1798, basically makes a decision to go with the British and not with the French. And that is when the French are kicked out of Hyderabad. And if you look at the territory, even until the late 1700s, early 1800s, the state of Hyderabad included Telangana, Andhra both. Andhra Pradesh was also with the state government, with the state of Hyderabad. What happens is that the agreement with the British is that the Nizams have to pay, I think, 24.17 lakh rupees a year to keep 6 battalions of troops for the Nizams so that they can use for war. But the Nizams don't have the money to pay to the British. So then they start borrowing from a bank. And eventually they borrow so much money that they go into debt. So the British East India Company then pays off the bank and effectively puts the Nizam under their control. And because they pay off the bank, they say, now that we paid your money, you have to give us something back. So they take away Andhra Pradesh. That is how Andhra and Rayalaseema are mostly like taken away from the Nizam's Hyderabad state and merged with the Madras presidency. That is basically, if you look at the state of Hyderabad from 1720s or to 1860s or 1870s, the state becomes small, small, small. It becomes about roughly 1/3 of its original size because all the territory is taken away and given out to the British one by one, one by one. That is so. Finally, what is left is our 16 districts of 8 in Telangana, 5 in Maharashtra, the Marathwada areas, and 3 in North Karnataka. I think Gulbarga, Bidar, and Raichur, those areas. So that is the state of Hyderabad. That is the last boundary of the Hyderabad state up in the until 1948. So that is the thing. What a lot of people don't understand is that to get out of debt, the state of Hyderabad, what happens is that Salarjung one of the many prime ministers is somebody called Salar Jung I, a man named Turab Ali Khan, who was a very well-educated Anglophile who understands that if they don't, so the main reason the state went into debt is because they were not able to collect taxes properly from the farmers. So what Salar Jung I does is that he creates a system where everybody is basically told that all the revenue collectors are told that you actually all the farmers told that we don't care about what rain is coming, whether it is raining or whether it is not raining or whatever. This is your area. You have to pay us this much tax every year. They basically told that कुछ भी करो, कितना भी हो जाओ, कोई क्या भी like फर्क नहीं पड़ता. You have to pay tax end of the day, and if there's no tax, you give us the revenue. Like you give whatever produce is left. Basically, if you were a tenant farmer and your landlord would take away your entire thing if you didn't pay up enough tax. So what happens is the state of Hyderabad starts getting taxes revenue properly from the 1860s, 70s onwards. The state finances get better, but it comes at the cost of creating a very feudally oppressive. There was actually a study done to check the area of Telangana versus Andhra for farmers, how it was doing, and Telangana was a lot worse than Andhra. Because at least in Andhra, if you look at the situation, like I think the British at least set up more schools, more college, like at least there are actually more older colleges and schools in the districts of Andhra Pradesh and in rural areas than in Telangana. I think this is something that also I think there was a little bit relatively it was a little easier because it was the British that were running the administration. So I think it was little bit better. Like I'm not saying it is the best, but I'm saying thoda sa, there was some sort of how do I put it? Like I think feudalism was there, but not in the way that it was there in Telangana. See, in Telangana, what happens is you have the hierarchies, you have the Nizams. Nizams would marry into one family called the Paigas, and after the Paigas, you have the Salarjung family. Then you have the Jagirdars. I think about roughly 60% of land was meant for the Jagirdars or revenue collectors. 10% was directly owned by the Nizam, 30% was private land. That is the reason why Telangana government in today is the only, I think, government that has so much of public land remaining because the government used to own so much land. So 60% was basically meant for Jagirdari, and that's when you have different Jagirdar Deshmukhs. That's what they were called. I think the most horrible landlord that is remembered, especially if Puchalapalli Sundaraya writes in his book, is about Vishnuru Ramchandra Reddy in Warangal district, who I think had an area of around 40,000 acres of land. And he was known to be very cruel to his people. And actually, Vishnu Ramchandra Reddy is the person who faces the first revolt by Chakali Alamma in 1946. So all of these things basically lead. See, it's like while all this is happening, Hyderabad as a city is very closed off. Like Hyderabad city is very different. It's like a separate world altogether. Like you have less issues of caste. Like if you are living in the rural area, if you are a lower caste person, you basically grow up as a slave. But if you live in a city like Hyderabad, you also have better chance of living. So it's like, I think the Nizams mostly never moved out of the city. So I don't think they actually had like a ground level idea. There's one book called My Father Balaya, I think by Mr. Y.B. Satyanarayana. He writes about how his ancestor in Karimnagar district made a pair of leather shoes for the fifth Nizam of Hyderabad when he was visiting. And the Nizam likes the shoes so much that he gifts him 40 acres of land, 40 or 42 acres of land. So the landlord gets so angry that tells like Dalit ko, he tells the land Dalit, how dare you make some shoes for the Nizam, and how dare you hold land like me. Basically, he was angry के तेरे पास कैसा like my landlord हूँ तेरे पास कैसा land आया बोल के. So he takes away most of the land, and then that Dalit man eventually leaves the village. Slowly, the family eventually ends up moving to Sikandrabad, where they start working for the railways, and that's how they were able to get a better access to education and better life. So if you lived in Hyderabad, you had a slightly better chance of getting a better life, whether or not you are upper caste or lower caste. Upper caste people, of course, you have different. Like if you are a rich Muslim or rich Hindu or upper caste or upper class Muslim Hindu, have had a better life by default. But if even if people from the lower classes had relatively better lives, I would say, not best but better. So, but what happens is that um, I think the feudal system was very strong. Like, of course, landlords would not want to give up their land. So it makes sense that that's how it is. And I don't think the government really addressed it. I don't think the state of Hyderabad, the Nizams, really had an issue because they were happy for as long as they got the taxes. The landlords were happy for as long as they had the lands. The only people unhappy were obviously the peasants. And I think the word in Telugu is vetti chakri. Vetti chakri is basically bonded slave labor. Like there are people whose families would be attached to the landlords. They would grow up as slaves, die as slaves. Uh, so I think eventually it had to happen, right? You cannot discount that people will forever continue to work as like it's like the Russian Revolution. At some point, it had to explode. And I think if you look at world history, also that point of time, in the post first world war also, I think you have what we call the first like it's called the Comintern or the first international, second international, third. The communists were meeting. I think communism at that point of time was like this new, no, not new, but like this. It had like a sudden growth. It became like this revolutionary ideology that everybody got into, right? Like the British government, if you look after World War One, considered communists to be terrorists because they were more of because the communists said that we will have a revolution and we will overthrow the existing government. So they looked at them as terrorists. I think in Indian government also, and because the British were ruling India, obviously they were not really happy with the communists here also. So I think all of this put together, now if you look at the last Nizam's life, Usman Ali Khan becomes the Nizam in 1911. 1912, the government in Hyderabad sets up something called City Improvement Board. Between 1911 1941, the government really develops Hyderabad. Like you have Osmania University, High Court, Osmania Hospital, Mozamjahi Market. They actually develop slums at a cost of 54 lakh rupees. They demolish all the old slums and they build housing for poor people. So this is why I said he was not really a very evil man. And if I'm talking like if he was really a bad person, all this thought would not have gone into developing a city for people. He really, and the houses were given whether it was rich or poor, Hindu, Muslim, whatever it was. They gave houses to everybody. And especially if you were poor, if you didn't have housing, they built like 4 different kinds of houses, A, B, C, and D, with proper maps. They built like proper washrooms because after the plague also in the 1900s, they realized that city needs. So there was bubonic plague was reported in Hyderabad the same year Usman Ali Khan became the king in 1911. So after that, they really changed how Hyderabad was as a city completely. Look, I think by 1938 you got the Hyderabad State Bank. By the early 40s, I think in 1938 the Deccan Airways, the state Begumpet station, Begumpet airport. I think by 1940, mid 40s, it was developed. So and you had Kachigoda railway station, Nampally station. All of this was in a matter of 30, 40 years. Hyderabad got everything in terms of infrastructure. So it was like a very beautiful city that suddenly developed in a matter of 30, 40 years. So it's like this part of Hyderabad is it's like a golden cage where everybody is living happily, no income tax, right? Though there was unemployment, to a certain extent because there was no income tax. So people were slightly better off. Like if I'm like I said, right? If you had some means, if you had a job, like anything, basically, if you had any, that's why I think one of the issues that the last Nizam's grandson faced after he became the titular Nizam was that he was not able to pay salaries of thousands of people who were working for the palaces and the other places. The Osman Ali Khan also employed a lot of people, like the Nizam. I think the fair amount of income they required also was to pay the cleaners, servants. Like they would have servants just to clean the lamps and chandeliers or whatever. So stuff like that. But my point is that what was happening in the districts, this is all happening in one go. The landlords are there doing their own thing. I think 1927, 28 is when is the birth of the MIM, Majlis Ittihadul Muslimin. I think the MIM was started by somebody, or I think it was started by an ex-government official, Mahmood Nawaz Khan. And I think it was originally started as a social organization. Sorry, ask.
Yeah, my question is, we know that in British India, there is, they started representation, they started giving representation to Indians in the legislature and all that. But in Nizam's Hyderabad state, was there any body?
There was. Actually, we have something called the town hall that was built in the early 1900s. It was built as a gift to the sixth Nizam by the people of Hyderabad itself. It was a legislative body, and I think, like you said, after the 1920s, between that between that first half of the 20th century, I think by the 1930s, there was an elected and non-elected legislature. It's a mix of both. I think you had people who were directly elected, and I think half of the people in the town hall were nominated by the Nizams. So what happened is that the Nizam there was no cabinet ministry earlier. The Nizam, after a point, got tired of the British interference, and he said, "ये तुम लोग चले जाओ. I'll be my own prime minister. He basically said, I don't want any prime minister. I'll only do my own thing." बोल के. And the British didn't want it. British wanted someone that they also preferred as prime minister. So the Nizam set up. I should have got the notes, but basically there was a council. So he dismisses the council and he sets up a new ministry, kind of like a council for like what we have, state ministers basically. So you see some transition happening towards some kind of more, I wouldn't say democratic reform, but more like, it's a little bit like in England in the 13th century when the king had to give up some powers, right? But I think here the Nizam did control. The Nizam was the final word on everything, but there was some kind of legislative change also. Like I think in the town hall, in the assembly, or whatever you want to call it, there was also reservations for Dalits and tribals also. So I think Dr. Ambedkar's influence, especially for the lower castes having representation, also had an effect in Hyderabad as well. So I think there was there definitely was a legislature. They had elected, they had and nominated post both.
Yeah,
but I don't
why
know.
Why I asked that question was, so what was the purpose? What was the need for setting up MIM in 27-28?
So that's what I'm saying, right? So MIM started as a social organization for all people, Muslims of different schools of thought, to come together. Now this is the easy explanation. But if you look at, so what happens is MIM eventually is headed by a man called Bahadur Yar Jung. Lot of scholars still revere Bahadur Yar Jung as like a very brilliant orator and genius. Bahadur Yar Jung was a Mehdari Pathan who was also very pally with Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He didn't, I don't know, I've not gone through extensively about what he's written, but basically they used to share ideas on the future of India, Pakistan, Muslim. Now what happens, I think I think somewhere in between, Bahadur Yar Jung basically becomes very powerful, like to point like he's like MIM transitions from just being a social organization to a political organization. And that's also okay, it's not, but you see strands of communalism coming into the picture from that point on, from the 1930s onwards. And interestingly, there was a separate movement that never really became a movement, but it became like this. It's called the Mulki movement, which was a movement by Hindu and Muslims from Hyderabad, Hindu Muslims, everybody from Hyderabad, who were very angry with the North Indian UP Muslims from Aligarh who came and got government jobs. So all of these guys got very angry that the government is preferring the North Indian Muslims, and they told them to get lost. Basically, that is the reason behind this Mulki rule coming, where anybody from outside of Hyderabad had to live here for 13 years to be called a local, or had to be living here as a resident to get government jobs. So that also happened. So this is like, I think to a large extent, if you look at Hyderabad's social fabric, I don't think it was very, like, you don't actually find communal disturbances even when it was happening in India earlier also. I think to a large extent, people here are, or I would say were, or even are still quite friendly to each other. I don't think it'll ever come to that level of, say, maybe in UP or this thing, because I think because having Pakistan close to the border, I think makes a big difference. I think people tend to like get impact a lot more. Here, there's nothing, like, it's people living together here. But I think if you look at MIM history, somewhere apparently, I think they changed the constitution. This is what Mr. Burgula Rao also would, Ramkrishna Burgula Narsingh Rao would keep repeating, that the MIM's constitution changed to something called Anal Malik. Anal Malik translates to "We are the kings," and I think that is where the problem starts, where basically the party goes into this whole क्या बोलते supremacist attitude. That, so what it says very, very interesting. They don't just say that the Nizam is the king. They say we, the ruling Muslim class should be in power, and it kind of even supersedes the Nizam, saying that the Nizam is only representative of that. It doesn't even have any Nizam of like it. And apparently, the last Nizam was very unhappy with that this thing. So Bahadur Yar Jang dies in 1944 under suspicious circumstances. Until late, there is this whole rumor that the state had something to do with his death because he propagated that theory. So we don't actually know what really happened. Some people who knew the Bahadur Yar Jang family say that he just had a very heavy day and died of cardiac arrest. Some people say he was poisoned in a hookah or at some place, and that's how he died. I don't think we'll ever know what really happened, but he basically dies. I think that is where the problem really begins. See, by 1940, by 1939, by 1940, if you look at like, I mean, believe it or not, Hyderabad also had its own rational, progressive thinkers among Muslims and Hindus right from before the 19th. It's like after World War One, you see a lot of young people actually going to the library, reading. They get affected by the Russian Revolution. They also feel like it's time to do something here. So you have people like Raj Bahadur Gaur from the CPI, Jawad Rizvi, Ravi Narayan Reddy, all of these people, Maghdum Mohyuddin, all of these people who start coming up, like you see them one by, like you see their individual lives. Like Maghdum Mohyuddin was a MA Osmania University MA student. He gets a government job, starts writing poetry, becomes very famous in Urdu as an Urdu poet. Raj Bahadur Gaur as studying as a doctor in Osmania University. He participates in something called the Vande Mataram movement. I think he was supporting the Congress initially in his life, and then eventually he moves on to CPI. Jawad Rizvi writes about the student movement that he saw in the 1930s, and he writes about that how MIM was also communal organization. So it's like Bhagat Singh writing about the RSS and telling, and I think you may be knowing about this, Bhagat Singh's views on the RSS and on Gandhi. He says that basically he says you can't trust these people. So I think people from that progressive movements generally were very wary of of religious organizations. They were not really in sync with them. So you have all that's why in 1913 and 1940, something called the Comrades Association of Hyderabad is born, because CPI is banned in Hyderabad state. And I think K.M. Munshi, I mean, I'm not really a fan of K.M. Munshi, but in his book, he writes that it's very interesting that only the Congress, no, not the, that the, he writes that the CPI and Congress were banned and the MIM and RSS were not banned. when in fact both of them were the religious organizations and the other two were only political organizations. I mean, if you look at the Hyderabad state's government job situation also, you will see that, I mean, especially in the police, like, see, many of the landlords in Telangana were non-Muslim. But if you look at the government jobs, I think 60% or more or around that point were Muslim. So I think there was an imbalance. I think slowly over a period of time, it just it was not addressed. I think that's why it just remained. I think I don't remember who writing about it. I've not gotten into this aspect fully to like check what was the cause for this kind of massive imbalance in government. I mean, given the fact that the state had 80%, 85% Hindus, should have ideally more. Basically, so there was an imbalance in jobs. Now, this is all social part of it. As far as the political part of it is concerned, 1942, you have the Quit India movement. And see, Hyderabad state was part of the British Indian state. Like it was not an independent country, but it had some features like an independent country. Like basically, it had a separate currency called Halia Sikka. It had its own postal, it had its own railways. It had some features of a country, and Nizams of Hyderabad were also had the last Nizam had a slightly higher status than most princely states. So his title was HEH, His Exalted Highness, and he was considered to be, I quote unquote, a faithful ally of the British Empire because he helped the British in the First and Second World War, right? So the Nizams of Hyderabad basically thought that the British were his best friend and they would help him forever, number one. Number two, 1944, Bahaduri Arjun dies, and for 2 years, MIM has different leaders until 1946, when somebody called Qasim Rizvi, who was a failed lawyer from Latur, Maharashtra, who takes over the MIM. Now, this man is where a lot of the actual problems begin, because Bahaduri Arjun was an out and out extremist in different ways. Like, I think Omar Khalidi in his book After the Fall also writes, I remember this line very distinctly in my head, that he writes that the MIM has been accused of having fascist tendencies not without cause. Because from what I've been interviewing people, right, from whatever I've learned, while the Sundarlal Committee report talks about how violence took place against Muslims after Operation Polo, I think there was largely to a certain extent. So Qasim Rizvi basically 1946 comes into the picture. This man now starts drumming up support for Hyderabad's independent state, like Hyderabad staying independent. So what happens between 1944, 47, 848 also, there's a very quick succession of prime ministers. And one of them, a few of them are sensible people who tell the Nizam, don't unnecessarily cause problem for yourself, negotiate with the government and just join the Indian Union. That's what happens. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel also, if you see his thing, he is like more interested in Hyderabad and concerned than with Kashmir. He's like, Kashmir, jaane to gaya, but Hyderabad hona bol gaya. So if you like, his concern was, I mean, it's right, because Hyderabad is bang in the middle of in India, right? So you can't have a country within a country. Very weird. At least Pakistan, the issue is that there's a border that we share with Pakistan. Like, it makes sense. So Pakistan, East and West Pakistan, first of all, East and West Pakistan is very absurd, because Bangladesh is kahan udhar, wo Pakistan kahan idhar, like, I never understood that. But anyway, but my point is, there were a lot of things happening at the same time, because Qasim Rizvi starts going around and he starts giving public speeches. You see his public speeches, it starts getting communal, starts becoming a problem. Normally speaking, the state of Hyderabad should have put someone down immediately if they saw he was causing trouble, but of course they don't. CPI starts in 1939-40, called the Comrades Association of Hyderabad. I think 4 or 5 members, Alam Kundmiri, Jawad Rizvi, and like a bunch of people start CPI secretly, because parties obviously banned. In Telugu districts, they start under the guise of something called Mitra Mandali, to get, like, they turn it, they call it a library, but basically it is a secret CPI hub for people to come and join. So that's how they start getting in 1944-46, when all this MIM thing is happening. I think the first revolt starts against the landlords in Telangana's Warangal district by Chakali Ailama. That spread. Doddi Komaraya, one more person, he gets killed by the landlord's henchmen. Then 1947 is when the CPI Telangana formally gives a call to turn it into an armed struggle, and that is when they start going and killing the landlords, and they start fighting back. very interesting armed struggle, because I think this is one of the few places in the world where an armed struggle took place without really any arms, because they were only stealing it from the police stations and whatever they could find. But CPI becomes very successful because people are very tired of the landlords, right? So it was a very popular revolt, and a lot of people don't realize that many of the landlords are also hand in glove with the Razakars. So Razakar starts in, I think, 1947 only, after independence, when basically Qasim Rizvi starts it like a volunteer organization. Because when the British leave in 1947, there is actually no Hyderabad army that the Nizams have, because they were depending on the British. So when the British leave, army is gone. So what I think they have 15 to 20,000 people, maybe at best, semi-trained in the army. And I think they were starting to recruit even young boys in the army after a point, because they didn't have anybody. I've interviewed a couple of old people who told me, yeah, we were just 16, 17, and the army just came and took us, saying that, come, we have to go fight now, Bulgaria. Razakar also same thing. Qasim Rizvi was an idiot. He was not a military man. He was nothing. Just because you wear a beret and if you wear a military clothes doesn't mean that you become a military man, right? So you're not Che Guevara to fight somewhere in jungles. But they Qasim Rizvi like if you, but I think what happens outside of in Hyderabad, I don't, in Hyderabad city nothing really happened in terms of violence. But I think before 1948, the Razakars, see, out of maybe 100 people I've spoken to, at least 40% people are from Telangana, and they've told me that they don't have, people generally have nothing to complain about the Nizam, but they were like the Razakars. Like I very interestingly, I met one man from Karnataka, from Gulbarga, a very old man, 90 plus years. He told me that the happiest days of his life were from the Nizam's period before independence. But he was like, the after the Razakars came only, everything changed. And he said they came, they started looting the house, and most of it was not done because they believed in India or in Hyderabad. Most of the Razakars were just basically gundas, like just looting because they could. That's about it. Ante మీ దగ్గర కొంచెం పవర్ ఉంటే you do whatever you want. అంతే. So Qasim Rizvi was saying Hyderabad independent, but Razakars were basically a band of looters. So what they used to do was that the local Razakar, if you knew the local Razakar head, they would not really do anything to you personally. If you knew somebody personally, that, like I have people who are interviewed said, because my father knew the local person, they would come and warn us saying that tomorrow we are going to come and do this. You please leave from here, okay? So things like that. And people have bad memories of how they had to run away from their house. And I'm talking before Operation Polo, right? The only reason why a lot of Razakar violence was not affected, like there was Razakar violence in Telangana also, but the CPI was actively fighting them. That is the reason why you don't actually, like, that is why the Razakars also, like, they had like, so it was very, this is, I think this is something that people don't talk about. Like a lot of the CPI cadre were actively involved, engaged with the Razakars only. I think the Bairanpalli massacre in Warangal is a very good example, where the Razakars and the state army people just come and shoot an entire village for supporting the CPI. Some 80 to 100 people were killed at that point of time. I remember this I remember reading the article about it. It's a very well recorded story. Like, I think this is the problem. I think people don't talk about what the Razakars did. There's a lot of people, a lot of, I think maybe a lot of people, because what happened after Operation Polo was such a massive killing in terms of numbers, especially on Muslims. I think people, like, what happens before is something we all don't talk about. I think that is one reason maybe why the BJP can exploit this, because, and I still say this to this day, I think the people of Telangana, the Telugu people of Telangana were the kindest to the Nizam, because they more or less accepted the socio-cultural relations between the, see, it's like the Telugu people in Telangana learned Urdu happily. They were able to, for as long as the landlords got the land, they were happy to do whatever they wanted. I mean, if you look at the language history also, you'll see that Andhra has massive amounts of literature from the 19th century, especially from Rayalaseema, Rajamandri. While Telangana does not have any Telugu literature much coming from, and that is because of the fact that Telugu was not given preference in spite of the majority of the speakers being Telugu. And this is in complete contrast with the Golconda kings, who actually learned Telugu, allowed Telugu to flourish. They even wrote in Telugu also. They called themselves sons of Telangana. Like, if you look at the Nizams, man, they were just basically North Indians for the first 2-3 people. Like, they were as North Indian as any North Indians today also. So, manaki ఏంటంటే, like, I think their cultural sensibility also was from the north. They were, why would they care about Marathi, Kannada, Telugu? Valki enti. I think it's only the last 2-3 Nizams who kind of really got themselves into the culture, and I think that makes a big difference. Like when you don't understand what is your surrounding, socio-cultural situation, I think it makes a big difference. I mean, imagine the last Nizam promoting Telugu language. That would have made such a big difference to anybody. And I think I remember this distinctly, especially among the upper classes. If you didn't know Urdu, basically you were considered to be like a person who has no, you're basically a brainless person. Like any other, knowing a local language was kind of seen to be like some, "Arey, enti, what is this? What is speaking in bol gaya?" I think that is why.
I think speaking in Urdu is, I mean, kind of minimum criteria to sit at the
It's
table.
like, yeah,
Speaking in
yeah,
Persian
basically,
also is
exactly.
considered very elite, right?
So Persian was considered to be elite until Persian was replaced with Urdu. Urdu was basically the replacement of Persian. Because if you, the first Urdu newspaper in the 1800s when it started was shut down after 6 weeks because nobody was reading Urdu initially. They were still preferring to be reading only Persian up until that time also. It's only after a while that Urdu became like a big, it replaced Persian to be like a more beautiful language. But I think this is the problem with Urdu in general. I think the notion that Urdu is a beautiful language is really stupid, because language is a means of communication. It depends on, your Telugu is as beautiful as Marathi, as Urdu, as English. It, you can compare and you can say that, "Arey, this language sounds better," but how a language sounds depends on who is listening to it, right? For an Urdu speaker, most of the Urdu love comes from acceptance and love for Persian, which, and a lot of, I think this is why people need to read history. If you don't really read history, you don't understand that Persian language is not like a lot of the upper class Muslim gentry. Basically, for them, it's like knowing Persian Urdu is like a Muslim, like it's like a, like I think problem is that today is the concept of Urdu is attached to the Muslim identity, which is very sad, because Muslims don't, and Islam does not need Urdu to survive, right? It's an Indian Muslim thing. Mainly, it is attached to UP, Lucknow, Bhopal, and Hyderabad also. I think people don't get the fact that we speak in Dakhni. Dakhni is a language that existed before Urdu. Our language is actually, the spoken language till date is actually Dakhni. Like ఆంధ్రాలో కూడా డిస్ట్రిక్ట్స్ లో అది ముస్లిమ్స్ వాట్ ద స్పీక్ ఇన్ ఇస్ యాక్చువల్లీ నాట్ ఉర్దూ. ఉర్దూ చాలా డిఫరెంట్ గా ఉంది. ఉర్దూ దక్నీలో తెలుగు వర్డ్స్ ఉంటాయి, మరాఠీ వర్డ్స్ ఉన్నాయి, కైకు ఉన్న కోహా. సో దిస్ ఇస్ ఎనీవే డిఫరెంట్ మ్యాటర్. వాట్ ఐమ్ ట్రైంగ్ టు సే ఇస్ దట్ దేర్ వాజ్ an issue with language also. I think one of the things that in the armed struggle with the CPI revolution also, that they brought up the fact that Telugu was suppressed in Telangana, which I would not disagree with, and I don't. Nizams did it purposely, but that's what I'm saying. Right? It came from there. It came from the people around them. A lot of the people working in the administration were Muslims, from Shia Muslims from UP, from Aligarh. So for them, they learn Urdu. For them, Urdu is their language. They're like, Urdu is the best language in the world. So I think that is I think they should have taken into account the local languages which they did.
A question.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that this system of Jagirdars is there throughout
Yes.
the state of Hyderabad, not just in the Telangana Telugu speaking districts.
Yeah. Everywhere.
Right.
22,000 villages.
So why did why to my knowledge there is no armed struggle in Kannada speaking or Marathi speaking districts.
No,
right?
it's not there. No. Not.
So why is that?
That is why the CPI was not able to get. I think they were not. I think Telangana was a dry state, right? So I think the feudal operation was a lot worse. I think generally speaking, the area of Telangana. I think this also goes back to the feudal aristocracy. The feudal aristocrats from before the Nizam period were continuing even under the Nizams. I think this is one very interesting Indian thing that people don't get. Whether it was the Nizams, whether it was the Mughals, they never really disturbed the caste structure also. So the people who were the landlords from, like, that's why under the Nizams you also had the Samasthanam. So I think there were 8 or 12 Samasthanam Rajas, Vanaparthi, here and there. Like, these guys continue to remain in their place from like until towards the end also. There's something very complicated. Like, you can't. I don't blame the Nizams entirely for letting what happened, but at the same time, I think maybe there should have been some kind of. I think they plan to do some kind of. I think they plan to like change, they improve the education, but like education is a very, very big thing. I remember, I think Narsingh Rao telling me that the state of Hyderabad had only 6% of education. That is why one of the reasons it was why Telangana still or at least was very backward compared to Andhra, was because of lack of education. Like in the districts, if you were living outside of the city of Hyderabad, you basically had access only to 7th class tak in the district town. Like for example, Nalgonda town lo ante meeku 7th class daaka 7th class tak आपके पास खाली एजुकेशन था. తర్వాత యూ హ్యాడ్ టు కమ్ టు సిటీ ఫర్ ఫర్దర్ ఎడ్యుకేషన్. సిటీలో వచ్చిన తర్వాత కూడా మీకు అది అంటే డిఫికల్ట్ గా ఉంటుంది కదా. మీరు ఇఫ్ యూ కమింగ్ ఫ్రమ్ డిస్ట్రిక్ట్, అప్పుడు ఒక 100 years ముందు కమింగ్ ఫ్రమ్ నల్గొండ టు హైదరాబాద్, ఇమాజిన్ ఇట్ వుడ్ హావ్ టేకెన్ సో లాంగ్, 100 something kilometers, రైట్? ఇప్పుడు అంటే 2-3 hours మనం 2-3 hours లో మనం
and also to get acclimatized is also difficult, right?
Yeah,
Because they are two different worlds.
Exactly. Like there are people who have come, and that's why this hostel where the CPI was born in Hyderabad is called Reddy Hostel in Abbots. Reddy Hostel was built for poor backward students to come and study and stay there.
So in fact, some related thought on which I want your comment is, like what I have read a few places that this kind of alienness about Hyderabad for people in the districts, that actually continued even till 1980s, till NTR became chief minister, right?
Exactly. See, the thing is, the rural lives, unless you were a landlord who was living in the same way that the other, see, the landlords are rich people, right? So they used to copy whatever was happening in the Hyderabad elites. So they were fine. They were learned Urdu, whatever. But if you are a person from, that is why I'm saying, because it didn't happen on purpose, but because people were special Urdu became a direct marker of your elitism. So if you're found speaking in Telugu, अरे क्या तेलुगु में बात कर रहा है बोल के बोलते हैं, because Telugu is some kind, Marathi, Kannada, Telugu as if some kind of low level language. But that is, I think, the biggest difference that was, like, if you are a Telugu person who learned Urdu, by default you had acceptance to everything. But if you didn't know, then it is a problem. So I think anybody who came to Hyderabad, basically, I think the state's official language was Urdu. That is why everybody in school learned Urdu. So by default, see, in a way, it's a good thing that everybody had access to a different language. But I think the only issue was that the local regional language was not given importance. I think that was the bigger problem. Like, they should have concentrated on the fact that Telugu people should have been allowed to learn Telugu. Marathi people should have had access to more Marathi. Kannada to more Kannada. Like that should have ideally solved the problem. I remember, and I'm telling you this because I remember in a book written by Jawad Rizvi, of all the publications between 1858 and 1948, out of 287 something publications, 230 something were Urdu in a state with 44% Telugu speakers. And next came English. And then you had Telugu. And I think Golconda Patrika, run by Mr. Suravaram Sudhakar Reddy's father, was, I think, the most prominent Urdu Telugu publication of its time, which kind of gives, like, see, I think the CPI, of course, it's a political party, but it was involved in a lot of these social movements also, which is why you can rely on the CPI's on the newspapers for some kind of understanding as to what was the real issue. If you look at the regular newspapers like Deccan Chronicle or any other bigger newspaper, you will get a very different version of the same news, right? Urdu papers may, again, not all Urdu papers were very pro-state government. Some were kind of anti-government also. I think, see, coming back to exactly what you're talking about, this whole point between 46 to 48 becomes very, very politically turbulent, like very bad, actually. I think after Qasim Rizvi he starts the Razakars go around targeting, looting people. I think this is the problem. I don't think the state government also recorded all the atrocities by Razakars. It's my understanding. I think not all Razakars were looting, but I think wherever it happened, there are still very, very bad memories that Telugu people have in the districts of the Razakars. And I think that is something that should have been addressed, instead of just letting our older generation talk about Razakars and just forgetting. I think that, but I think the good thing in Telangana is that the CPI was so strong that Telugu people had one ally in the Communist Party of India and the communists who were willing to stand up for them. I think that kind of really helped. Maybe that's why if you notice in Operation Polo, in the violence after 1948, most of the killings took place in Marathwada and Karnataka, not in Telangana. And this is not something that people, this is something people easily forget. Like no one, everyone says, हाँ, more ज़्यादा लोग मराठवाड़ा में और कर्नाटका में मरे, but no one asks why it didn't happen in Telangana. Happened because of CPI. All the CPI people I have spoken to basically said that they received orders from the top to ensure that no communal killings take place, and the cadre actively worked to prevent people from fighting in communal clashes. I think that is a, given the fact that there was partition, given the fact that Kashmir happened, I think this is a very big responsibility that the CPI took. To give credit where it's due, like even and the Congress in Telangana or Hyderabad was very very small, like it was not very powerful. I think Swami, very very funny actually. The Congress was headed by two people, Burugula Ramakrishna and Swami Ramananda Tirtha. Swami Ramananda Tirtha, it's he was a proper congressman, but I think he was a little bit socialist also in his outlook. So if you if you see the literature from the 40s 50s period, a lot of people accuse him of being pro-communist even though he's a congressman, and they abuse him saying that ये तो अंदर से socialist है या अंदर से communist है बोल के, which I think is really unfair for him. He was also, I believe, an Arya Samaji, so I don't know why they kept calling him communist or socialist or whatever. See, even Swami Ramananda Tirtha also wrote a book on his own version of what happened. That's why I'm saying everybody has a very different account of what actually happened. So in 47, after independence, when the British leave, basically Qasim Rizvi now starts doing this whole drama of now staying Hyderabad being an independent state. I think he's very infamous. He has given a speech. I think somewhere I think his I think people who were alive that time vividly remember his words. हम लाल किले पे आसफिया का झंडा लहराएंगे. I think that was very provocative. I don't know what he was thinking, honestly, but you do have some people who met him and have written about him. You have the book called October Coup by Muhammad Haider, the last commander, so last collector of Osman. He writes in his book about how Qasim Rizvi said a lot of communal things, like in the conversation that they have, where something like Muslims, like Hindus are good people, but we've been ruling Hindus for 800 years, so that is why we should be in the ruling class and things like that. Obviously, a lot of people don't agree with Qasim Rizvi, and I think one of the biggest examples of that was some after this whole Razakar starts going around causing trouble. You do there is I think seven or eight. They're called seven Mirzas, but they were not seven Mirzas. There was a man called Farid Mirza. I have his book also. Farid Mirza and some other government officials get very scared of what is happening with the Razakars, and they write to the Nizam saying, "Please do something about this and just merge with the Indian Union." And the best example I think of Razakar violence is we have in Hyderabad is the murder of somebody called Shoaibullah Khan. Basically, Shoaibullah Khan was a Congress, like he was associated with the Congress. He was running a newspaper called Imroz. Shoaibullah Khan writes basically asking the state of Hyderabad to merge with the Indian Union, and I think I think Razakars shoot him down just 1 month before August 22nd, 23rd के night के बीच में. So Burugula Narsingh Rao, the man who I interviewed and I knew so well, he was an eyewitness to the murder of Shoaibullah Khan, and Shoaibullah Khan was basically shot dead by the Razakars for his pro-India stance. So I think that kind of because and this murder is the biggest, like this is what the Indian government investigates for a very long time, like because they for them it's like a big example to show what the Razakars are doing. So Shoaibullah Khan's murder, I think, was quite possibly the biggest political unrest in like the incident that caused unrest in the entire city. Shoaibullah Khan's murder was yeah. So that's what happened. One month later, I think, and before that in 1947 November, I think November 29th is the or first. I'm not sure exactly, but November 29th, the government of India and Hyderabad sign an agreement saying that okay, from now 1 year we will discuss. It's called the standstill agreement, and they're supposed to negotiate terms, and a lot of khichdi happens. KM Munshi come like so. It's very funny if you read. There's the last prime minister is somebody called Laik Ali. Laik Ali, exact same incident. Laik Ali has one version of it. KM Munshi has one version of it. If it's like you're reading about World War II from two different perspectives. So they try, but I think finally, I think they also managed to get some weapons from what is that? Sydney Cotton, an Australian man who flies in with some weapons. The Laik Ali gives weapons to Qasim Rizvi and the Razakar. There's no doubt. He writes that in his book. So for them, see this. I think it was a little bit of misplaced Hyderabadi nationalism where not everybody was interested in causing problems for everybody. Like everybody, see, all the people who were comfortable with the Nizam were like very pro-Nizam, but there were a lot of people who also felt that we should join India, because at the end of the day, the larger question would be how different was Hyderabad from India? Like, that's what I said, right? Hyderabad had some features of a country, but it was not a separate country. So the Nizam's claim of being, he wanted to just stay independent. I think if you look at if you look at what he was asking for, it was very similar to what was given to Kashmir, like a semi-independent state run autonomously for Hyderabad by the Nizam, which I think was very impractical for anybody. But I think the major issue that the Indian government probably should have avoided was the violence that took place after they came. I think it was not even a war. And if you look at the September 13th, the Indian army starts coming. Syed Ahmad Al-Adrus makes the very smart decision of not engaging with the Indian army, because he realizes that they are not actually equipped to fight with an army that has trained in World War One and World War Two. Like, you can't fight with some 15,000 semi-trained men with a massive army like the Indian army. So he surrenders on September 17th, and that is when it's over. Like, and normally, ideally speaking, you would expect the government of India to arrest the Nizam or put him in whatever. But then the Nizam is treated like the king only after that. He has no problem. Like, he's living his life happily. I think K. Munshi asked the Nizam to give a radio speech that they're now surrendered or whatever. But 1940, I think 1948, it's actually in small waves that violence happens. So I think it's only about few. Like, I met people who have seen the violence, so it's only after 1 or 2 months or a little bit later. I'm not sure, maybe 1 month later of the exact. Pandit Sundarlal is sent along with some other people after Jawaharlal Nehru is petitioned saying that, sir, there's a lot of violence happening, please come and do something. So he sent the committee, and I know people who met him, the people who met Pandit Sundarlal. So they told me that he was also shocked at the level of violence. I think apart from the army, this whole aspect, a lot of locals indulged in communal incidents. I think maybe it was anger against the Razakars, for people who were affected by Razakars. It was maybe just the right wing groups that were waiting to be active, because if you look at the government of India, they also mention in their intelligence reports that they name saying that these are the right wing groups, Hindu right wing groups, and also people who are like mentioned causing problems. They they also then start doing something about it. But there was like there is actually a series and wave of violence against Muslims. Latur mein, I think about 40% people leave, or they're forced to leave because of all the violence. So you have, if you look at the areas, no, that is a place where you see that the Razakars also caused a bit of disturbance before Operation Polo. My guess is that it could be because of the Razakar violence before Operation Polo that people are very unhappy and kind of got revenge back. Or it could be simply because of what happened in partition, that people were affected by partition, that Pakistan, India mein break ho gaya, bol ke people were just, it's like a quid pro, like it's like every time something happens to people, maybe Muslims in India, some Pakistani Muslims will go and attack minorities there, right? Something like that. I think it's just mindless violence that took place, and I think that is where we fell. Like, I think that should have been avoided. Like, ideally speaking, if the army came, army should have not let any violence taken place. Like, maybe if the army was directly or indirectly, like, not involved also, it should have done something about the violence. It should have prevented. Like, ideally speaking, you would expect the army to prevent violence. Maybe, and I think क्या बोलते हैं, it's only after a while that things calm down, and then the Pandit Sundarlal committee also, by the way, is only an estimate. It's not a very accurate thing. So nobody actually knows the full extent of what really happened. As I said, like, you have some people who have claimed in different. I think in Urdu books you'll find claims that Pandit Sundarlal committee says roughly about 40%, 40,000 people, Muslims, were impacted, or who face violence or killed in that sense. But I think some sources mention 1 lakh, 2 lakh, or even more. We don't really know what happens. It's only, I think that is something that we should have really avoided. And I think now post this, what happens is even more interesting. 48, this happens, and I think for about 18 months there is a military governor. I think it's called the MK Velodi. I think it's a Malayali minister. His government, basically, it's a military governor. After which there is the first election, and the Congress wins the election. And I think that is where the whole Andhra Telangana, this is the genesis of the Andhra Telangana issue also. I think there was a concern that people from Hyderabad and Telangana would be at a disadvantage. Exactly what I told you, right? The system of education. We were only learning Urdu. We were not learning English, right? In Andhra, people were learning English thanks to the British administration. So, and I think the official languages of the Indian government were Hindi and English. So, at least people in Andhra had like a big advantage of learning English language over that really helped them like in terms of jobs. I think because people in Telangana, Hyderabad were very limited. Like I think English schools were more limited here comparatively to other states. So that's why I think the biggest issue was jobs. Okay, what will happen to our jobs?
Yeah,
I
but
think that is
that would be a completely different topic, which we
yeah, of
will
course.
take
No,
up
I'm just
some
saying
other
like
day. But
right. Sure. So coming back to what I was saying also, one of the things that sure if you look at what happens after Operation Polo, setting aside this whole job thing, um, the Razakars are mainly arrested. Like I think many of them were killed during when the army came. Also, not a lot of them were arrested. I think officially only maybe 100 or a few hundred were arrested, and I have to check up. I'm not sure exactly whether they were let go or they were jailed. But Qasim Rizvi was jailed for nearly about 10 years, and the MIM, and he leaves the MIM in the hands of locals before he leaves. About roughly close to 10 years later, he was allowed to leave for Pakistan, so he leaves. Dies like a very unknown, relatively in penury. That is why in 1958, I believe, is when Mr. Owaisi, Assaduddin Owaisi's grandfather Abdul Wahid Owaisi agrees to take on the MIM and kind of they change the name to All India Majlis, All India MIM. And this, like, it's interesting. CPI, like you pointed out, should have probably won a lot more seats, but unfortunately for them also, I think it was not fully recovered. Even during the first election, they contested under the name of People's Democratic Front. That was the party. They put up a frontal organization to contest. That's how they. I think the joke what a lot of old people tell me, at that point of time in the 40s, 50s, if you point to a lamp and say that the lamp is a communist, the lamp will win the election. So something like that. So I think there's one person, right, Madapati Hanumantrao, who's known as Andhra Mahapita. I think he was very well known in terms of literature and writings. So I think he was put up by the Congress and the communists, just to prove a point that how much public support they had. They brought some random newbie from Bhongir to contest Madapati Hanumantrao, and they defeated Mr. Hanumantrao in the election. So I think CPI was quite strong. And believe it or not, I forgot to mention completely during the armed struggle, the CPI leadership actually sent 4 people from Andhra's leadership to go and meet Stalin in Russia. They actually go. There is a very big conversation that happens about how they are trying to get help from Russia, but obviously Russia at the end does not agree. So, but I mean, you can imagine they want that they go and try to ask Russia for help to start a separate communist country.
yeah,
So that is
and
that
one of the
ISO,
reasons
yeah.
one of the reasons Stalin did not agree to intervene is because Telangana does not have a port, so access is a problem.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So I think it's all interesting, and I think the CPI is one of the reasons why I think Telangana, Andhra probably are a little bit more progressive socially. Also, I think I would say that not fully. I don't think we are like 100% progressive because we still have obviously very typical Indian issues. But I think to a large extent, compared to North Indian states, I think that is the reason why our people are slightly, I think at least comparatively better. Like at least I'm not saying that we are better than everybody, but thoda sa social changes were there. I think left movements generally tend to have like a little bit of a more progressive idea, like outlook on things. I think that's why you will, I think find less people believing in superstitions and less I think generally speaking a little bit more scientific. I think we can say that to a certain extent. So
Hetuvadam,
that's what I would say.
rationalist అంటారు కదా.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what happened to let's
The
talk
Nizam?
about what happened to communist sympathizers or communist leaders in the immediate aftermath of
Many of them were
Operation
arrested.
Polo.
They were all underground. Many of them were underground. Many of them were in hiding. It for about three and a half years. They were not able to come out of the hiding because they had arrest issues. They had shoot at side issues. I think there was also a curfew for a while, so nobody was actually able to come out in general. Many of I think the Telangana leaders wanted to stop the armed struggle and negotiate with the Indian government. That is what happened basically. I think the Andhra, like Puchalapalli Sundaraya, Basavapannaya, they were all hardliners. They were unwilling to stop. I think there's a man named Mr. Muhammad Khaja Moinuddin, who was from Medak district. He was a landlord from Medak district who gave up his lands to the poor people and joined CPI. So what Mr. MK Moinuddin told me is apparently that when Nehru met Sundaraya, asking what the hell do you really want, Sundaraya supposed to have remarked saying, "We want the red flag on the Lal Killa, on the this thing." Something like that. I think Nehru was also a socialist, right? And Nehru, I mean, this shows how socialists and communists were not on the same page. Nehru was socialist, and the communists were on a different page. But I think many CPI people were actually out or hiding. Many of them they could not really come. And I think many of them also faced a little bit of torture in jail. You have CPI people after coming out of jail and writing about what happened. Many of them escaped jail. Like I know one man, what's his name, Mr. Jaini Malaya Gupta, who was from Bongir. He joined CPI. He was being taken to jail and he then escaped and ran away. And then finally, after around 2-3 years later, only he finally came to his house because of all this. So CPI faced.
So whatever Indian government did to communist leaders and sympathizers, is it legitimate? I mean that is
I don't think
CPI a banned organization at that time. Nizam banned it. You said that, but
Nizam banned it.
But government of India also banned it.
I'm not sure. I think I'll have to check up the larger CPI. I don't think the CPI was banned everywhere in the entire country. I think there was a problem in Telangana because only the Telangana CPI was doing an armed struggle, right? Because you had Kerala communists who contested. So I don't think it was banned. Like they had the national level leaders who were not underground. Like they were also the national level leaders were talking to the state level leaders saying, "What are you doing by Bandar Doi? Kya hai, kab tak karte bol ke?" So I think there's a more of a restricted to Telugu. I don't think CPI was banned everywhere. I think there was some concern because if you look at the reports from by the government of India, the word used for communist cadres was terrorists. So they were saying, I mean, if you look at the armed struggle, the CPI didn't have so much of machinery, right? They were just using basics, like maybe they were throwing small bombs here and there. So those were termed as acts of, and also the CPI leaders went after a lot of the landlords. So I think now that the landlords could complain to the government, you had them calling the CPI. I think thoda sa complicated hai. We should not look at it purely from what is today's definition. I think it's just that political context was different. And I think CPI did what it thought it was right. And eventually, I think they both, at the end of the day, they also realized they can, like, it's like, in a way, you can say that this was maybe the precursor to Naxalite movement in India. Before the Naxalite movement came in Bengal, the Telangana armed struggle was the same thing, an anti-feudal movement, right? I think here they realized that if we don't give up and if we don't come to the mainstream political, they'll not be able to do anything after that. I think that is why the decision was eventually made in 51 October 20th is when the CPI formally calls off the armed struggle after discussions with the government of India. And I think to give credit to the Indian government, they could have suspected them of doing something even further, but they didn't. And I think they accepted that, chalo, now this is over. They will now join the political system. So I think probably any government in the British government also was very wary of communists, right? So I don't think it's anything different. I don't know.
Good conversation. I wish we have more time and probably we'll take up that other topic that you wanted to discuss about Hyderabad's. I mean, how do you look at Hyderabad's evaluation in the last, post-independence actually?
Right. Okay.
In terms of not just how it is developing economically and all that, but in terms of really how the fortunes of different classes in this society have been evolving and changing. That we will take it up some other time. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate that.
No problem. Nice talking to you.
My pleasure too. Bye.